No big opening line, except to say this is the series finale of Superhero Pantheon. Hello, everyone, and welcome back once again. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find us here at The Real World for the next couple weeks, and then we'll have some announcements about where we'll be plying our podcasting trade very soon. But please, again, leave a 4 or 5-star review. We will still be maintaining our page on iTunes, so continue to leave 4 or 5-star reviews so as to help people discover the great work that we are doing here at Superhero Pantheon and beyond. My co-host, of course, is Brian. Brian is here once again. For the last 5 years, we have been doing Superhero Pantheon. We've discussed well over 200 movies at this point. So many of the movies that we have had a chance to discuss, these are the movies that have gone into the Superhero Pantheon. Brian, if you can believe this. Let's check this list out. So we, in terms of Batman, we have Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, The Dark Knight Rises, Batman Mask of the Phantasm, and of course, The Batman, which we just put into the Pantheon. Spider-Man has entered the Pantheon 3 times, mostly recently, Spider-Man No Way Home, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Perhaps most controversially, no Spider-Man 2. In addition to that, we have the X-Men franchise has also been a huge part of what we've done here at Superhero Pantheon, including X2, as well as X-Men First Class, Days of the Future Past, as well as Logan, the most recent entry from 2017. And we'll just pretend like the New Mutants and Dark Phoenix never happened. Of course, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is extremely well represented in our Pantheon, as you know, Brian. Iron Man is a huge part of it. Of course, the first MCU movie, kind of a legacy. We also have Iron Man 3, which got in by virtue of us betting fictional characters' lives, which we have certainly come to regret, given our feelings on Iron Man 3. The only trilogy, Brian, is the only trilogy to make it is Captain America. Captain America, the first Avenger, Captain America Winter Soldier, as well as Captain America Civil War. All 3 Captain Americas thus far have been put into the Superhero Pantheon. Also, not all of the Avengers movies, 3 of the 4 Avengers movies have gone into the Superhero Pantheon. That would be, of course, the Avengers, as well as Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame. 2 Guardians of the Galaxy movies have been entered into the Superhero Pantheon. That, of course, being Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, as well as Volume 3. Volume 3 just went in last week, literally last week. We also have had Black Panther, which is in general agreement among the 2 of us that it is the best of the MCU movies, maybe ever at this point. As much as the sequel was a disappointment, Black Panther 2018 may be the most culturally relevant MCU movie of all time, and it is pretty incredible to think about just where we were as a culture and how much things have changed, and all that good stuff. So, in terms of the MCU, we also put in a couple of television. We put in the Watchmen television season from HBO, the one and only season. We have also put Batman Begins Forever as well from the 3rd season of Harley Quinn. And just in terms of this list, I feel like I may even be forgetting something. But what I'm not forgetting, Brian, is when we started this 5 years ago, the very first movie that we reviewed and put into the Superhero Pantheon was Superman from 1978, arguably the very first modern superhero movie. Brian, I figured it would only be fitting if we kind of started there, kind of ending where we began with some reflections on our journey. And this is a great time to talk about Superman because, Superman has gone through a lot uh, over the last few years, including as part of our journey, just in terms of discussing the four movies with Christopher Reeve, not to mention everything that's going on with the Zack Snyder universe and the upcoming Superman Legacy movie that James Gunn is going to be directing. But Brian, I think Superman is a good place to start because that is the very first movie that went into our Pantheon. We also included Christopher Reeve as well as Margot Kidder and Richard Donner. They're also a part of our Pantheon as well.
Yeah, man. When we first reviewed that movie, like I think that was the first time I watched it in true HD and just was falling in love with the cinematography and never kind of realized how great the cinematography in Superman 1 truly is. Especially the Kansas stuff looks fucking amazing always now. Especially thank God for HD because it really heightened the picture quality and the viewing experience. Because when I was a kid, Superman didn't hit as hard. And I don't know if it's the VHS quality or like I didn't have as much nostalgia for it, but upon the most recent watch when we did it, it just fucking stood out, man. And it's got to be the HD because I think it really enhanced the picture quality and it really enhances the experience. So credit to Warner Brothers for restoring that proper. I think there's a 4K version probably out right now, but highly recommend it. It's definitely worthy of the Pantheon. And man, like I mentioned before, like Christopher Reeves is like, I mean, for that era, like he's like a true like iconic hero for, adults in their 50s now, saw him as a hero, or even in their 60s, saw him as a hero, back then. And for our generation, like I mentioned before, it's kind of like Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man. So to have that kind of like seeing those kind of parallels when No Way Home came along, I was just like, man, this is like what the people must have experienced in like the 70s and 80s when seeing Christopher Reeves. That feeling of like, this is my guy, you know what I mean? Like, and you see that in the original Superman, and he just encapsulates what being Superman's all about. Henry Cavill, I still like him a lot, but I don't think anyone's topped Christopher Reeves. But just a truly tremendous movie. I kind of wanted to also talk about Superman 2 a little bit because when we did this podcast back in the day for Superman 2, that episode, like it was hard to find the original cut, and it still is. Like there was no HBO Max at the time, so you would have to find it on Amazon Prime. But then Amazon Prime would kind of list the Donner cut as the actual Superman 2, which led me to realize, wow, the Donner cut has become the predominant cut of Superman 2, and it's been this transition in the last 20 years since they released the Donner cut. So it's been kind of cool to see because as a kid, like I've seen clips of Superman 2 on like the USA Network, and then watching the Donner cut like in 2007 or whatever it was, and then watching Superman 2 again, I was like, wow, the Donner cut is like totally taken over, and I feel like that's what happened with the Zack Snyder Justice League cut as well. So yeah, just a crazy history with Superman, and it sucks that Henry Cavill, like, I guess his last appearance as Superman is going to be one-on-one with The Rock that goes nowhere. So, yeah, that's kind of like where we're at with that. And the new Superman is coming in 2-3 years or whatever it is, and I guess we can talk about it when it comes out then. But right now, Superman 1, the definitive Superman movie, for sure. And I still love Man of Steel, and I know Jerome hates it with a passion, but I do find moments of Man of Steel just truly like awe-inspiring. So, but I also get that awe-inspiring feeling from the original Superman as well. So, yeah, just highly recommend it. That was a highlight for me because, like I said, that was the first time I watched it in HD, and seeing Clark stand in the fields, just truly beautiful stuff. And HD really ups the ante when it comes to the picture quality. So, yeah, I wasn't nostalgic for it as a kid. So it's very strange how that's kind of grown on me as I've gotten older.
So I want to point out, in keeping with the Superman discussion, and I would echo a lot of your sentiments, even though the Superman 2 did not make it into the Pantheon. I'm still glad that we were able to have a full conversation about it. I think that's the thing that you realize when you get through all of these movies, and we've gone through the entire MCU at this point, the entire DCEU. so many superhero movies of the past, even probably some ones maybe that we should have skipped out on. But I think so many of these movies, even if they're not good, even if they're pile of shame worthy, are certainly worth having conversations about. And Superman 2 is one of those. Superman 3, I think that Superman 3, it is not a great movie. Maybe it's not even a good movie, but I would argue that one of the coolest scenes in the entire history of kind of what we've done here is the battle of but the two Christopher Reeves, right? When you have Superman versus Clark Kent, I think that's one of the coolest things that we had a chance to talk about, and it's a really great moment. And I think that if there had been a way to kind of turn that into the movie, I think that that easily could have been something that also went into the superhero pantheon. So a movie like that, a scene like that, I think that's something that really stands out. And in terms of scenes that we've had a chance to discuss, I think the thing that I have realized and appreciated, and I've said this before, I'm going to say it one more time here. The opening of Blade is still the best opening to a superhero movie that has ever existed, and I will fight anyone who disagrees.
I mean, yeah, it's pretty hard to argue against it. It's hard for me because for some reason, Infinity War pops in my head, but it's a 30-minute kind of like sequence, if that makes sense. That whole opening of Infinity War. So when you say intro, I'm like, damn, Infinity War's got a 30-minute intro. I don't know if that counts, but yeah, just Blade running, going through that, or you see the vampires and then Blade coming in with the water coming down. And then if you happen to watch House of Usher on Netflix, folks, there is a similar scene to that, and it's even more gruesome because it's chemical waste. So if you haven't seen that episode or haven't heard of that show, folks, go check it out. Highly recommend it. It's a good kind of adaptation of the Poe movies from like the 60s that Roger Corman did. But man, that scene was just like a call, not a callback, but obviously kind of like a homage to Blade in the worst possible way. But yeah, Blade's opening is still iconic. Blade 2 still, better than Blade 1 in my opinion. Blade 3, of course, is in the pile of shame. But yeah, that's kind of that, what is it, the Ryan Gosling, or not Ryan Gosling, but the Ryan Reynolds kind of curse in terms of some of these movies before he did Deadpool. Obviously X-Men Origins Wolverine did not help that movie at all. But it seems like Deadpool was the one that got him to turn it around. But yeah, that's very interesting the way we see it. And speaking of Deadpool, I gotta say, man, Deadpool with the way they're doing Deadpool 3 has me excited. I know the whole nostalgia thing doesn't really tickle your fancy as much, but we're gonna get Wolverine in the blue and yellow suit, so we're getting that.
Yeah, it's certainly going to scratch the nostalgia itch. We'll see if it's actually good or not. And I don't know. I really like the first Deadpool. I really did not like the second Deadpool. I know that when we talked about it, I think it was kind of lukewarm. It's definitely a movie that has not aged well in my head. But I think the first Deadpool certainly turned things on their ear. And I think about those kinds of movies that have gone kind of outside the box, and we've had so many of the counter superhero programming. I look at things like Peacemaker, which you refuse to you refuse to finish.
I
I
tried. I
think
tried.
about The Boys. I think about Watchmen, which we mentioned earlier as having gone into the superhero pantheon. It's pretty remarkable just how much the game has changed and kind of where we're going to go moving forward with the continuation of the MCU. The ubiquity of superhero movies. When we started this in 2018, I mean, literally the year that we started this, Brian, think about this. In 2017, we had arguably one of the greatest years in superhero cinema. We had Logan that came out in March. We had Wonder Woman, another movie that went into the superhero pantheon. We had Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which, while admittedly not in the pantheon, is one of the most successful movies in the MCU. We also, of course, had Thor Ragnarok, which basically reinvented Thor in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So that was coming up, and when we started in 2018, that's what we were coming up. And then 2018, Brian, we had Black Panther just a month after we started, And then we had Infinity War, which as much as I like Endgame and as much as Endgame is kind of the tops on my list in terms of the MCU, it's a solid number 3 on my list at this point. It really feels like Infinity War was the peak in terms of the popularity, the speculation, the theorizing. Uh, Nobody, I don't think any, unless you were there in 2018 to 2019, I don't think you can fully appreciate the magnitude of Infinity War. Was it obvious that they were all going to come back? Yes, it was. But in so many ways, it just feels like the impact of that movie is something that the MCU itself has still not really been able to reckon with. And it created one of the most memorable in theater experiences. And again, it really just felt like it felt like a real moment. And that's kind of was at the beginning of our run.
Yeah, and I remember like all was it the NFL? They started using the whole snap thing and people fading away, and then it became a meme. It was great. It was a moment in time. You're right, and like that 1 year in between was like total speculation and anticipation, and like hope, and like all the things we wanted to see, and like Spider-Man reuniting with Iron Man, and that was an amazing moment as well. But it seems as though the snap has become like this iconic thing that went into the pop culture. You know what I mean? Not just superhero geekdom or whatever comic book culture, but it actually went into the common pop culture, and with like the memes and stuff, it was just tremendous. And people were doing the snap kind of thing for like a whole year. It was crazy. And then when they started teasing Endgame, I like the fact that we got like a serious lack of footage on Endgame, and we got like almost all the footage we saw was practically the first 20 minutes, maybe. So that was very interesting, and all the speculation that went behind it. It was a tremendous time, and God, it feels so long ago because it was 5 years. But the way I think about it now is like the snap, and then the 5 years later, we're in the 5 years later now. So that's kind of my like, wow, like the 5 years in between, that was pretty much our podcasting time. So it's kind of cool to see the MCU kind of like finally catch up to time, like the current timeline of 2023. But I still wish that they, explored more of that 5 year gap, because I feel like those are some crazy stories to tell. They touched on them in like, of course, WandaVision and not Falcon Winter Soldier, Hawkeye. They touched upon it with the new Black Widow. But yeah, it's just tremendous, that time period and the ramifications of it. I just wish there was more like, well, the original Black Panther 2, obviously, the script was going to be based around kind of this existential feeling that, Black Panther was having because he was gone for so long. And then obviously with Chadwick Boseman's unfortunate passing, like that completely changed. But yeah, and just seeing Black Panther perform as well, and seeing like like the Wakanda Forever thing become like an actual thing, and like doing it at PWG shows when PWG shows were still in Reseda at the time, and just like everyone coming up to each other doing the Black Panther, it felt like a unified kind of moment. And I love those clips of like the teachers putting on the Black Panther mask and doing the Wakanda Forever to introduce each one of their students. I've seen that video, and I love that video every time I watch it. So there's something about the Black Panther movie that brought people together. Of course, it was like a cultural force of nature, but yeah, just seeing like the success of it too. Like I remember tracking the box office because I was so curious after that first weekend, and to get like I think it was 20 million on a Monday in February is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever seen in the box office. And to this day, I don't think any movie has had 25 million on a Monday in February since. So it's very like one of those things where like the whole Black community came together, and finally like they got their hero. And we talked about other movies too, like Meteor Man and stuff like that. So we've kind of explored that too, the forgotten stuff with Robert Townsend. So we've really like tried to explore all the corners of the superhero genre, so to speak. And we did miss a few. Like we did miss some 90s ones, and I did have the 90s month back in like 2018, but of course you can't review them all. And then of course I forgot about some not so relevant ones like the Phantom. The Crow, I know, is something we probably missed big time, but I think we can kind of come back with that next year when we talk about that on our new channel. But I kind of want to reserve that for Halloween. We'll see. But and then of
Yeah,
course
we'll see. I mean, The Crow is such a weird one. Like, it feels like it just eluded us. It never felt like it was the right time for it. The Phantom, the same thing.
especially
Like, the
with the,
Phantom.
I mean, in this last 5 years, they've announced a Crow remake at least 3 times, and have
Oh
never,
yeah.
never happened. And then of course Tank Girl, which is of course based on a comic as well. So it's just those '90s, maybe like smaller budget, something you don't even think about kind of thing. But we did explore like the Power Rangers movies, which was so cool. Um, I got nostalgia pops for that. So yeah, I mean, we've really explored a lot of different corners of the superhero genre on this podcast, and I'm really proud of it. And then around 2020, we kind of took a small break from it. We kind of started doing the Pantheon Plus stuff, which is really cool because it allowed me and Jerome to explore different genres and explore different actors' careers, stuff
It
like
was
that.
a much needed break, especially in 2020 because of the pandemic raging at that point. There wasn't a lot of superhero content. I know that I was feeling burned out, and it's kind of a feeling that has only escalated in the 3 years because there's been so much Marvel content that has come out, and I'm sure we're going to address some of that a little bit later. But certainly, I'm glad about the fact that we were able to talk about the Lord of the Rings extended editions and the Three Planet of the Apes movies and all that good stuff. So that's been a lot of fun as well. I think the movies that have also been really interesting is looking at kind of Marvel before the MCU, talking about two Hulk movies, talking about Dolph Lundgren's Punisher, kind of going through the Punisher movies, the Ghost Rider movies. Brian, can you believe we have talked about Nicolas Cage many times on this podcast, including with Kick Ass and Spider Man Into the Spider Verse. Yeah, it's pretty wild to think that we've gone through so many of these movies and so many of these actors, and we certainly have gone through and put people into the pantheon as well. I don't even want to get into that list because I know I'm going to miss some individuals, but just in terms of some other reflections, one of the other movies that we had a chance to talk about, and I think this is a good way to talk about some animation. I think animation has certainly carried the day recently. I think about Ninja Turtles Meet Mayhem, which I'm not sure if that's Pantheon worthy, but it's really excellent. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which has gone into our Pantheon. We have Batman Mask of the Phantasm. I mentioned that earlier. And of course, The Incredibles, which I gotta say, Brian, Syndrome is not a great character, but he feels all the more relevant in 2023. Like, the farther we get away from that movie, sadly, the more relevant Syndrome feels.
I mean, we talked about it last week. Chris Pratt was like totally no selling the the bad guy's speech. He was doing the exact type of speech and the trope of explaining his plan and saying he's not really a villain. He's trying to perfect the universe. And Chris Pratt is just, our Star Lord, just like, shut the fuck up. I've heard this a million times. You're just a selfish prick, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, he's throwing it back in his face. This is Incredibles right now. And of course, there's probably other movies I'm not even thinking of that do that exact thing now because it's almost like a trope to make fun of the trope, right? But that's kind of the way we've evolved since The Incredibles. And credit to Brad Bird for that because he seems to be the first person to kind of point that out. I would argue that Austin Powers kind of did that first. I don't know if you want to agree with me on that one. But when Seth Green is criticizing Dr. Evil for not.
I think it is a byproduct of the 90s and 2000s culture of responding this postmodern way of thinking about things and pointing out things, the irony and, taking a more sarcastic turn. I think that's just a part of the culture at the time. And I don't know if we're necessarily moving away from that, but it feels like we need to go kind of in the opposite direction at this point. But in terms of what The Incredibles was able to do, just in terms of both Pixar and superheroes, it's still, as of this recording, it is still the best Fantastic Four movie to ever be made. Hopefully, the next one is better, but at this stage, it's still the best. I still can't help but think about what a disappointment the sequel was. And, there were certainly some very good moments in the sequel, but it really felt like, we were anticipating this for like 14 years. And again, the first year of our podcast, we did have The Incredibles 2 come out, and I remember just being really disappointed in it. And yeah, what are some of the other disappointments that you've had over the years, either in terms of movies that we've discussed that came out before the podcast or movies that have come out since 2018?
Well, I did have hopes for the Justice League movie, but then with the whole history and whatever behind that, I actually got the movie that I wanted years later, which I totally denied even existed, which I technically was right at the time when I said that. It technically did not exist. There was a half work print existing at the time and not the full print, so technically I was right. But yeah, Justice League 2017, super disappointing for a lot of reasons. Yeah, and that's kind of like the first one that pops into my head is like a major one. You mentioned Incredibles 2, but Incredibles 2 has like amazing animation that kind of carried the movie for me. I was just kind of like, wow, this animation is so detailed nowadays compared to the first one. And the first one in 2004 had amazing detail as well. So, but then like, with the evolution of animation, obviously, you know, I'd say the Turtles movie slightly looks better than Incredibles 2, just based on the art style. So that might be a controversial opinion. I don't know, but and we even talked about the Turtles movies, right? And how disappointing the third movie is. But as a kid, you don't really think about that, and then when you're watching it as an adult, like this is bad, dude. Like what the hell? Two, I'm still forgivable of it because Ernie Reyes Jr. Yeah, he's from Surf Ninjas and The Last Dragon, and of course he was Kino or whatever his name was. But hey, I had a Filipino hero growing up, and he was in Ninja Turtles too, so that was really cool. And yeah, I wouldn't say disappointment too much. Like I would say, if anything, some of the movies that were not even the Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, I feel is like one of those movies I should have watched 20 years ago. But I picked it for the whole road trip month back in 2020, and it turns out that's like one of the most, I don't know, it stuck with me a lot, and it still sticks with me to this day. And I've watched it the last 3 Thanksgivings now, and seeing John Candy in that role, and then all of a sudden, like with the recent Steelbook 4K release, or not even the 4K, just the re-release, they found like the deleted scenes of him or John Candy in public, sitting down, smiling at people, smoking a cigarette while eating a hot dog in the most disgusting way ever. But it's just brilliant. So, highly recommend finding that footage, the deleted scenes of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Yeah, I mean that movie really just stuck with me after and I guess it's just the wholesomeness of it and the performance of John Candy. Um, yeah, just something like that kind of sticks out. I would say, like, yeah, Brendan Fraser month was disappointing because of my nostalgic taste for Encino Man. Never saw Gods and Monsters, so I was hoping that was going to be good, but it just had that weird ending. So I would say that was kind of disappointing. But Creature Feature month from this year, thumbs up. I think that really surprised myself even because I got Jerome to like monster movies that I thought he would be on the fence about, but ended up liking them. So there you go. I don't know. In terms of like superhero movies that disappoint, that come to mind, like I mentioned already, the Justice League 2017. I would even say maybe even like Darkman, because I expected a little more in Darkman, but I guess that's the kind of Sam Raimi kind of finding his footing in the superhero world. And based on the rumors, he might actually be directing the last Avengers movie. So you never know. But, Sam Raimi has a big history in superhero movies. And I'm glad he came back to, Doctor Strange 2. And I really like Doctor Strange 2 a lot because it reminds me of Back to the Future 2. So, but yeah, I think Sam Raimi, has a big history, obviously, with the Spider-Man films. And then coming into the MCU and the rumors of him taking over. So, I would say Darkman was disappointing in a sense because I thought it was too cheesy. But I think Sam Raimi, if he directed the movie 10 years later, I think he would have done a much better job. And Liam Neeson wouldn't come off as like kooky and kind of cheesy at times in that movie. But I think 10 years later, for both of them, they would have been a much better. They would have done a much better job, I think. But it was 1990. What can you do? You know what I mean? And they were kind of experimenting, so that was kind of disappointing. And kind of going back to looking at like the Incredible Hulk from Ang Lee, for some reason I thought that movie would just maybe find a new kind of light. You know what I mean? I liked it when it first came out, and then over the years it just kind of got worse and worse. And then when we watched it for the podcast, I was hoping for something more because it's Ang Lee, but it's not there. So that was
It's weird to me that that movie has become so beloved among a certain group of people, and I think it's more because of Ang Lee than anything else, but like whole changing sizes and just the overall look. And I know it's 2003, but I just think that movie fundamentally doesn't work. But I kind of walked into the podcast knowing it didn't, so I didn't really feel like some kind of way about it. If I in thinking about my disappointments, and I have a little bit of a list here. A lot of it has been the last few years. Again, given where we are, given the some of the evolutions, and given some of the movies that are in the Pantheon, it's for me. I think about Wonder Woman 1984. I think about Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, and Thor: Love and Thunder as three huge disappointments. I would say there's enough in Black Panther that I still think it's good, but I think just with how impactful the first one was, that's the main reason the second one was so disappointing. But I mean, Thor: Love and Thunder is a borderline bad movie, and just with some of the effects and some of the things that were done, like that is a movie that is arguably one of the worst in the MCU at this point. And Wonder Woman 1984, I feel very similarly about. That movie came out Christmas 2020, kind of a big deal, being released on HBO Max at the time, also being released in theaters, like really the only superhero theatrical movie of 2020. And boy, was I mean, just from the very first scene, I was like, this movie is not working. And we did not do a full episode on Wonder Woman 1984. We did do a kind of a theatrical review of it, a little bit shorter. But boy, oh boy, Wonder Woman 1984 is one of the biggest disappointments that I think we've had on this podcast, as is Thor: Love and
Yeah, I kind of forgot about Wonder Woman 84 now that you mention it. But it's one of those things I've just accepted, and at least Pedro Pascal, I think he did a good job in the movie, given the assignment that he had. And yeah, I just kind of like Pedro Pascal in that movie. I think that's the only thing that kind of works for me. But other than that, yeah, it just wasn't working fundamentally. It doesn't continuity wise, it doesn't really work. There's all these weird things that happen at the end that doesn't really work. Just the fact that Hans Zimmer reused this score, and I know, like, composers reuse their score all the time, but like it just felt like lazy because it felt like they didn't have time to write a new piece of music for that scene, so they're just like, we'll just use that piece of music we used when we saw like Bruce's parents die in the beginning of Batman versus Superman, and they used the exact same music, and no one really had noticed except me. But I guess that's kind of part of it. And then the shoehorning into the Christmas stuff at the end was kind of stupid, but I get it. We were all feeling like, oh man, this Christmas is gonna suck back in 2020, and Wonder Woman tried to help, but it's not a Christmas movie, so why shoehorn it in? So it was just kind of one of those weird things they try to throw in there. But yeah, that's probably one of the one of the bigger disappointments in recent uh, memory and I forgot it, but is what it is. I guess in terms of disappointments, yeah, I mean, Thor: Love and Thunder, I didn't really like expect too much out of it because it's like the fourth movie in the series, and I can already tell like the villain wasn't clicking with like with a lot of people, and of course Christian Bale being in Thor at a Thor movie, you would think like, oh my God, this is gonna be great, and it just wasn't. So that's kind of one of the more disappointing things about having Christian Bale in the MCU is that he chose that role out of everything, and it didn't work out.
It's certainly, I would say it did not. And we're probably not going to see Taika Waititi direct anymore movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and perhaps that is the best thing for everybody involved. So I think in terms of evaluating some of the other movies on this list and just thinking about them and reflecting on them, I think for me, we've gotten so many superhero origin stories. We've kind of moved past them almost, but I do want to acknowledge the fact that we have a number of those represented in the Pantheon, and I think Iron Man is probably the most famous. And I want to plug the MCU book that recently came out. I would strongly recommend that if you have any interest, if you have listened to this podcast and some of the things that we have discussed, I would strongly recommend that you all pick up MCU, The Reign of Marvel Studios. I think it's well worth reading. It is very interesting, just in terms of the structure of the book, because they get into the toys, they get into like some of the disputes and some of the politics involved, and it really is a comprehensive examination of Marvel Studios, kind of from like day zero when Stanley was in Los Angeles in the 70s and 80s, trying to get these movies made, to the 90s when they were finally starting to get movies in theaters, to the 2000s with Spider-Man and the X-Men, and then finally being able to have their own studio before being purchased by Disney. So I would strongly recommend that everybody pick up that book, because there really is just a lot of good backgrounds. Joanna Robinson, Dave Gonzalez, and Gavin Edwards are the editors, the writers, and they do just a really fantastic job of giving you the full scope. And just as an example, because I really do want people to pick up this book, and I'm not being paid to say this, but the thing that struck me is just how influential the toys have been. And I guess I'm clearly an idiot for not thinking about that, but just realizing how much of a role the toys played, and just in terms of how the characters came together and why it took so long for us to get female characters. It's just a really good book, and I would strongly recommend again that people purchase it, including you, Brian. I know you have not had a chance to read it, but I hope you get to very soon.
Yeah, it's just kind of like on my like Christmas list for myself kind of thing. Like you always buy a couple presents for yourself every Christmas, right? So that was on my list amongst a few maybe movies and games here and there. But that was definitely astounded on my list for sure since you told me about it. And it's got like a comprehensive history of the timeline, right? Because I feel like we need like that now, because the MCU is kind of like ignoring the timeline a little bit. It feels, because let's face it, there's still a giant statue sticking out in the stratosphere. You know what I mean?
Just I have to say, this used to bother you, and I was like, whatever. But now it's kind of starting to bother me as well.
I mean, they haven't acknowledged it since 2020 or 2021, and in the timeline, I think it's 2023 when Eternals takes place. So it's definitely after the snap. It's just so weird that even the Marvels didn't acknowledge it. Weird stuff.
Just a lot of really weird stuff, and we're not going to do a full episode on the Marvels. We are also not doing a full episode on Aquaman. I don't even know that I'm going to see Aquaman, given, some of the things that have gone on, and the fact that, what does it really matter? The DC movies have just not been very good this year. So yeah, I'm not, we will not be doing full episodes, but it has been interesting to see the fact that Blue Beetle seems to have found an audience on streaming. And it's funny because the whole idea of that movie, it was supposed to go straight to HBO Max, and it had middling success at the theaters, but I certainly hope that people check that movie out. I think it's very fun. I think it's to me, it's like a perfect movie for streaming, and I will be very curious to see like what direction that goes in, because it feels like you've got Disney Plus trying to do their TV shows when, like, I think you and I have had more fun with like Guardians of the Galaxy, Holiday Special, and Werewolf by Night than a lot of their TV shows. I mean, you and I despised Moon Knight with a fiery passion, and I know you couldn't even finish Ms. Marvel. I didn't finish Secret Invasion. Like, that's the first Marvel thing that I have not finished is Secret Invasion. That's how bad it is, Brian. And that's one of the reasons that I kind of want to put a definitive ending to this podcast, because of just the glut of content and having, sort of an obligation doing this podcast to watch all of these things. And, sometimes, Brian, I just want to, I don't want to see Aquaman. And if I want to skip it, I'm just going to skip it now.
Yeah, I skipped Blue Beetle, but I'm probably going to end up watching it. I don't know. I'm thinking maybe Christmas Day is like one of those days to kind of stream that movie. That's the vibe I'm getting for myself. I don't know why, even though it's available now. But it just seems like a Christmas Day type of streaming movie to me. But we'll see if that actually happens, because I've been binging a lot of Star Trek OG lately too. So yeah, I mean, like I said, we actually branched out, talked about other things. We did the Star Trek ranking this year, that's one of my favorite episodes, Jerome. That's one of my favorites we've done. And yeah, just kind of like breaking away from the superhero stuff, I think was a good call. Bringing it back every now and then for the last couple of years. It allowed us to kind of like branch out and kind of like, I know Jerome was really like almost like done with superhero movies in general like 2-3 years ago. So I'm glad he thought of the idea. Let's do it like a separate thing. But unfortunately, we ended up watching Beverly Hills Cop 3, which, I guess you can't watch, 1 and 2 without watching 3, right? So there you go. And of course,
yes, we forced ourselves.
And he's coming back. Eddie Murphy's coming back to the role, right? Right?
I mean, I don't, I am just, I will believe that it is a good movie when I see it.
Wow, we'll see, because he's got the same jacket from the picture that I saw.
I mean,
So
he had the same jacket in 3 too, so I don't know. I don't know how much that matters. We'll see. We'll see.
we'll see.
I'm certainly going to give that a chance more so than his family holiday comedy that is going to be on Amazon Prime. No, thank you.
Yeah, I didn't even know that was a thing, and I haven't even watched Coming to
Family
America.
Kate Lane is what it's called, and it looks pretty mediocre.
Well, there you go.
So just in terms of some final reflections, I think that in terms of like the movies that have gone into the Pantheon, obviously there are a lot of movies. But Brian, if you were to say, like, what is your favorite movie that is in the Pantheon?
God, it's got to be Dark Knight, because that's like my automatic. I don't know. It's probably the best movie that I've seen in the last
I am
20 years.
I would love to disagree with you, but I probably am very much inclined to
But
agree with you. I think
I
Dark
mean, it's the
Knight is
first one that
definitively.
really like comes to my head. Like the first one that comes, like when we started this podcast, I was like, "Oh, Dark Knight is like automatically going in." That was the first movie I thought of qualifying for the podcast, and I'm like, "Yeah, once we get to this episode, it's just gonna be nothing but a love fest." And it
I
was
mean,
a total love fest.
it's one of our longer episodes. It's over an hour long. I mean, usually
And
we like
I
to go 50 minutes.
think I gave it a 50 out of 50, man. So, or a 49 or something. But goddamn,
Yeah,
that is
I
like
think it's one of the highest. That and Black Panther, I think, are two of the highest. And
yeah,
Black Panther, in terms of
definitely.
the MCU, is probably number one. But overall, I mean, The Dark Knight. I mean, it's a boring answer, I would say, but I mean, my God, it's right
I
there
would
for
say
you.
like again, like Infinity War may not as an overall whole be the best MCU movie, but I still say those first 30 minutes of Infinity War are the most like exhilarating 30 minutes in all of the MCU. Like that sequence up to the
I would not say they're exhilarating, given that Loki gets his neck snapped, but you do you.
I mean, it was all part of it, because it was like the shock of seeing Thanos and like the shock of like
The
Loki.
thing is that what
Chance, you know what I mean?
it's you know, you love to make your wrestling references, so I'm gonna take my turn. It's like Vader beating up Sting in '92, or Brock Lesnar suplexing John Cena all those times at a SummerSlam. It's like a heel getting a definitive win and getting put over really strong.
That's what it was, man, and that's why I was like, wow, when they did it. And of course, Loki comes back, but just at the moment, I was like, Loki has been one of the most important characters of all the MCU up until this point, and he just gets jobbed out early, but for a reason to put another guy over. Like it was total
I mean,
wrestling.
it proves that the Russos were not fucking around, and it really put over Thanos as a strong character, and that fundamentally is the problem with Kang, is they didn't have the guts to do something similar. I mean, I don't know if you need to kill Ant-Man, but just the way that movie played out, like, aside, putting all the Jonathan Majors stuff aside, like, not a good introduction to the Kang character. Like, doing the He Who Remains stuff, like the idea of like the Prophet in Loki, very well done, and then just a wet fart in church of an appearance in Ant-Man Quantumania. And it's sad because again, they did the right thing in Infinity War, just in putting Thanos over very strong. Like in the first 30 minutes, he kills Loki and he basically like destroys the Hulk mentally. And you're ready to go at that point. And then the rest of the movie, like he just kicks ass the entire time. He kicks every single person's ass. He basically could have killed Iron Man if not for the deal that Iron Man makes. Like it is incredible how much they put him over and really made it Thanos' movie, and a gutsy call by them. And I'm not sure if we'll ever get that again, but that certainly was a magical moment. So, Brian, what is the worst movie? So we of course have a pile of shame. What do you think is the definitive worst movie that we have talked about on this podcast?
I gotta go with a tie between Catwoman and Fantastic Four 2015. Because like
I mean, those
2015,
would certainly be my two top
the
contenders. Superman
2015
4.
Fantastic Four movie, man, I just felt like it took me like 3 days to watch that, and it's like an hour
I
and
mean, it
40
almost
minutes.
broke you. I remember that almost
Yeah,
broke you.
yeah. God, I mean, cool body horror for like 30 seconds, but then everything else is just
I
like,
think the
what is
first act
this?
is okay. I think the first act there's hope, and then the third act is just awful.
I would say like second act onward, it's awful. But yeah, and then of course Catwoman. I don't know, man. That basketball scene still haunts me to this day. I don't know what it is, but like, goddamn. But on the
Oh, it's
counter
so
part of
bad.
that, I felt like Michelle Pfeiffer's stock in the superhero comic book world kind of rose in the last 5 years because of like, I would say there's kind of this resurging love for Batman Returns that's kind of happened. Have you felt that too?
I
Plus,
definitely would agree with you. I think that that
plus,
movie. I think that every month it seems like that clip of her whipping the mannequins, like, that goes viral. I think especially in the queer community, I think Batman Returns has become a very important movie, and it's still not one of my favorites. I still think it's too Tim Burton-y, but I definitely would agree with you, especially around that 30th anniversary. Just tons of love for Batman Returns.
and I mean, look, I got to say this. I was anticipating the moment that Ant-Man reunites with Janet Van Dyne in Ant-Man 2, and we talked about that when we reviewed Ant-Man 1, and that was like one of those big moments. I know it was like small in the grand scheme of things of the MCU, but when they reunited, man, my heart was like, yes, hope. You know what I mean? And it was such a special moment, and it was so like insignificant. I get it, but from the moment they teased her being alive at the end of Ant-Man to the moment of them reuniting, I was like, this is like a good like love story, distant lover kind of thing. You know what I mean? Fighting to have their passion renewed kind of thing. Like, it was great. And and that movie like has some low points, obviously, but obviously the main thing was to get to that moment, and I got my moment. So I was really happy with that, and the fact that it was Michelle Pfeiffer, it kind of ties with this Batman Returns resurgence
Yes.
that I've noticed. So it all kind of
I
fit.
mean, she gets to the big monologue in Quantumania, a movie that, again, I don't think is very good, but I think it says a lot about Michelle Pfeiffer that she gets the monologue. That, like, she literally, I mean, she doesn't literally take out a blackboard, but that's kind of what she does to explain everything, and I think she does a really good job. It's clunky as hell. I don't know if it's good, but she is good, and she's giving it her all. And
And of course, that
yeah,
ties to What Lies Beneath, which we of course reviewed this year as well. And that was a sleeper hit. You know what I mean? I didn't see when I was a kid, and surprised at how good it ended up being. So yeah, man, Michelle Pfeiffer. I feel like, I don't know. She's got a lot more left in the tank, obviously, and I feel like I don't know. I think there's like a big role coming up for her that something's gonna be.
I would certainly hope so.
There's like a
I
vibe
certainly
to it, right? Like there's something there about her career, like needs like an Oscar or something to kind of cap it off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see her get something really, really important and get kind of lifetime achievement Oscar award. I think it is well deserved. It is well earned, just in terms of what she's done for her career. I mean, she's been in a lot of underrated stuff. Things like Witches of Eastwick and Wolf. Like, I think those are super underrated as well. Both movies with Jack Nicholson. But yeah, I think that
Also, I got a shout out. I Would Never Be Your Woman, directed by Amy Heckerling, which was like straight to DVD back in '07, which should have been released in theaters, I think. Also has Paul Rudd in it. Yeah, I got to recommend that one as well. No one knows about it, but I'm a big Amy Heckerling fan, and I've kind of said that on this podcast. So yeah, definitely recommend that one, even though no one's ever heard of it.
absolutely. So, of course, this is our finale, and look, quite honestly, this is much more my decision than Brian's decision, just in terms of the way that things are going right now with superhero movies. You can see the box office. There's been some significant issues across the board. Just because you do a superhero movie doesn't mean it's going to make its money back. There's so much superhero content out there, and quite honestly, I don't want to feel like I'm obligated to see all these movies, and I don't want to go see Black Adam in theaters. I don't want to see Mobius in theaters. And it kind of felt like I had an obligation to do so, and it was kind of annoying. So that's one of the reasons that I want to kind of put a bow on this, and that's why we're doing this finale. So obviously, superhero movies are going to continue. Look, this iteration of the podcast is going to finish. This is not We are not CM Punk. Like, this is it. But if we decide to talk about superhero movies in the future, we will do so. We will not do so with this format. But of course, if something like Avengers: Secret Wars is worth discussing, we will certainly find the means to talk about it. But just in terms of the superhero pantheon, we are going to consider this a closed project. So, Brian, any final thoughts before we end this episode?
This is not a sad ending, folks, for sure. Like, we're just kind of like putting a bow tie on this kind of, thing on superhero movies. We're exploring other things in the next coming years, and we're planning things out. We're really excited about some stuff. I know we've discussed Studio Ghibli a lot that we never actually got to do it, and I know I've discussed like doing baseball movies, and I'm kind of building a long-term project for that as well. So there's a lot of things that me and Jerome wanted to explore, and this kind of gives us an opportunity to do so. And we're kind of trying to also maybe introduce some new movies that the other hasn't seen yet. So I'm kind of aiming for more of that kind of that kind of intro or kind of evaluation of a movie, that something that Jerome's never seen before, kind of like what we got with some of those creature feature movies. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to in the coming years when we explore on a different channel. We're not going to say the name quite yet. We're going to save that for the final episode bonus. But yeah, I'm really excited, and yeah, this whole journey has been awesome, and it really like showed me like different, like exploring different like things about colors, and how like I've really like emphasized colors in the last several years because of this podcast. I've noticed colors popping off the screen
Not
more,
to
and how
mention the design of costumes, the amount of farms that we've seen, characters getting drunk.
Oh yes, characters getting drunk. How can I forget? That's my go-to, man. Yes, I know Age of Ultron is not a good movie, but that scene of them getting drunk is top 10 MCU for me, because we actually got to know fucking, War Machine. Like, I felt like that movie actually let us, explore War Machine even more so than most of the movies that he was in, which is kind of strange, and it's only like a 5-minute scene, but you get to see him.
It also set up the heat for the biggest spot in Avengers Endgame.
Oh yes, the big, lifting of the hammer, and of course everyone's seen the footage of the crowd reactions from that night of the premiere. Go check that out if you want to relive some nostalgia, folks, from 5 years ago. That was awesome. But yeah, just it's an incredible journey, and I'm not sad we're ending it, but you never know. I mean, like Jerome said, we can probably do a superhero movie review here and there, but not too many. And maybe we could talk about The Crow during Halloween. Who knows?
Yeah, for sure. So, of course, this is our series finale of this iteration of our podcast, Superhero Pantheon. We have 2 episodes left, though. We are going to put a bow on Pantheon Plus as well. Now, Brian, one of the things that we have done is we made lists of franchises. We've done it a couple of different iterations, but next week is a big one. Like, if we were like knowing that our time at the real world is coming to an end, we have to put a bow on things. We have to pay some things off. This is like, Brian, this is like our WrestleMania. Like, we are paying off all the storylines from the last few years. And I think one of the most important ones is to have a definitive Star Wars conversation. Star Wars has been discussed on this channel before by other individuals, but Brian and I have never, ever talked about Star Wars definitively. We are going to do so next week. It may be the last podcast we ever do, but we are going to rank the 11 Star Wars theatrical live action releases. We are not counting the 2008 Clone Wars release, because really that's just that's like 3 TV episodes taped together. So we are not going to review that. We are going to rank the 9 movies in the Skywalker saga, as well as Solo and Rogue One. That is what we are doing next week, Brian. Are you dreading it? Are you excited? What are your feelings?
I'm dreading parts of it, but excited for most of it. I'm not going to try to be negative, folks. I'm not going to try to be snarky. If I end up being snarky,
no such promises.
If I end up being snarky, I'm sorry, but I'm trying to do the whole positive mental attitude gimmick, and we obviously have some disagreements on Star Wars, but I'm not going to make it a big deal.
I think we're going to take a circuitous route, but I think we are going to end up in the same place.
That sounds about right. It's just
the journey to get there is going to be a little bumpy.
I'm pretty sure a certain movie is going to be polar opposite ends of the list, though.
There are 2 movies that are going to be the polar opposite, I would say. There are going to be some strong disagreements with two specific movies.
Yeah, and for me, like I'm always flip-flopping on episode 1. I don't know what it is. Some viewings I'm just like, and then some viewings like this is pretty good, and then I don't know what it's something about
I
episode
mean,
like in the
we get
middle.
to have all of the Star Wars conversations that we have never had. So next week might actually be one of the longest episodes because we are going to get all of our Star Wars thoughts because this is it. This is the one time we will never podcast about Star Wars again. I feel pretty confident in saying that. Next week we are going to get all of our Star Wars thoughts out in the open. You know, I've done some writing on the Real World about it. I did a writing about The Last Jedi. People should check that out. I did a piece after the Legos holiday special of all things, but I had some things to say about Star Wars. So I've done it before, but next week will be the one and only time that Brian and I podcast about it together. So you have that to look forward to. Now, there's one more episode after that. We are not. I will say at the end of next week's episode what it is going to be. But in the end, Brian, there is no more fitting way us to end it than with a very special movie that is coming out on December 22nd. It is not Aquaman 2.
And it's not Godzilla -1. So I know I kind of hyped that up as well when we talked about it during Creature Feature Month, but I'm not going to say the genre, not going to leave any clues. But yeah, it seems like the perfect full circle kind of ending that comes at the right time of the year. Perfect timing.
So, for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you not only for listening to this episode, but for listening to any and all episodes of the Superhero Pantheon. If you have not listened to our other episodes, or if you've missed some, please go into the Real World archives to check out what you've missed. And thank you for listening, and thank you for the support the last 5 years.
Have you noticed we're always dropping these like deadpan one-liners at the end of every episode?